You send a message and get nothing back. Not a short reply. Not a reaction. Nothing. And what's strange isn't the silence itself. It's that you know something shifted. The conversation was fine 2 hours ago. The warmth was there. And then, without warning, without argument, without any visible reason, they just went somewhere you can't reach. Most people have two explanations for this. Either their partner is punishing them, or their partner is losing interest. And they spend hours in their own heads cycling between those two possibilities, reading the silence like a verdict. But both of those explanations are almost always wrong. Because the researchers who have spent the last 3 decades studying this specific behavior, the sudden withdrawal, the disappearing act, the partner who goes cold without explanation, have arrived at a description that sounds almost nothing like punishment or disinterest. And once you understand what's actually happening inside the brain when someone pulls away, the silence starts to sound completely different. In the 1980s, a developmental psychologist named Mary Main was studying how adults talked about their childhood relationships. She wasn't studying romantic partnerships at all. She was looking at parent-child bonds, specifically at something called attachment theory, a framework first developed by John Bowlby to explain why children panic when separated from a caregiver. But what Main discovered was this. The attachment patterns that form in the first years of life don't stay in childhood. They migrate. They show up in how adults argue, in how they handle conflict, in what they do, physically and neurologically, when a relationship feels uncertain. She identified a pattern she called dismissive avoidant attachment, and the behavioral signature of this pattern is exactly what happens when your partner pulls away. Here's what the neuroscience says is actually happening. In 2012, researchers at UCLA used fMRI imaging to scan the brains of adults during moments of social rejection and emotional threat. What they found stopped them. The brain regions that activate during relational threat, the anterior insula, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, are the same regions that activate during physical pain. Not similar regions, the same ones. Emotional threat and physical injury are processed by identical neural circuitry. For someone with an avoidant attachment pattern, closeness itself, real intimacy, genuine vulnerability, registers in those circuits as threat. Not consciously, not as a choice, as a biological signal that says, too close, pull back, regulate. When your partner goes quiet, they are not doing something to you. Their nervous system is doing something for them, the only way it knows how. To understand why this pattern exists at all, you have to go back roughly 40,000 years. Early humans didn't live in nuclear families. They lived in groups, small, interdependent clusters where survival was entirely collective. And in those groups, attachment to a caregiver was literally life or death for an infant. Separation meant exposure. Exposure meant predators. Predators meant death. But here's the part that changes everything. Not all caregivers were consistently available. Some were absent. Some were unpredictable. Warm one day, cold the next, unreachable under stress. And infants raised in those environments learn something adaptive. Don't need too much. Don't signal vulnerability too loudly. Regulate yourself, because the external regulator isn't reliable. What looks like coldness in an adult partner is the fossilized survival strategy of a child who learned that closeness carried risk. In 2016, researchers at the University of California, Davis analyzed attachment data from 78 countries and found that dismissive avoidant patterns were more prevalent in populations that had historically experienced higher rates of environmental stress and resource unpredictability. The pattern isn't random. It was selected for. It helped those children survive caregiving environments that punished emotional need. Your partner didn't choose this. It was built into their nervous system before they had language, before they had any concept of what a relationship was supposed to look like. Now here's the study that almost nobody talks about, because the finding seems impossible. Researchers at the University of Amsterdam measured cortisol, your body's primary stress hormone, in both partners during and after moments of emotional withdrawal in 94 couples. They expected to find elevated cortisol in the person being withdrawn from, the one left in silence, the one cycling through those explanations. And they did find that. The abandoned partner's cortisol spiked, significantly. But here is what nobody predicted. The cortisol levels in the partner doing the withdrawing were higher The person who pulled away was under more physiological stress than the person they left behind. How is that possible? Because pulling away isn't rest. It isn't indifference. Neuroscientist James Cone at the University of Virginia has spent 20 years studying what he calls social baseline theory, the idea that the human nervous system is calibrated to function in close proximity to trusted others. Isolation isn't a neutral state. It's a biological cost. When someone with an avoidant attachment style withdraws, they are doing two things simultaneously. They are deactivating the emotional system that registers the relationship as threatening, and they are paying the physiological price of isolation, because their baseline nervous system still needs the connection they are running from. The silence isn't ease, it's containment, a pressure system with nowhere to go. Here's what this means for you. The person who pulls away is not telling you that you don't matter. Their nervous system is doing the only thing it learned to do when the weight of connection became more than it could hold. And the cruelest part of this dynamic, the part that makes it so hard, is that the more you pursue, the more they retreat. Not because they don't want you, because pursuit activates the same neural threat response that closeness does. The chasing and the pulling away feed each other in a loop that neither person designed and neither person fully controls. Researchers at Stony Brook University who studied this cycle in 156 long-term couples found something that reframes the whole picture. Avoidant partners showed the strongest physiological response, the greatest heart rate surge, the most significant cortisol elevation, not during withdrawal, during reunion. When the partner they'd pushed away came back, their bodies wanted the closeness their minds had learned to fear. That's not indifference. That's not punishment. That's one of the most painful contradictions a nervous system can hold, needing exactly what feels most dangerous. And understanding that doesn't make the silence easier to sit in, but it changes what the silence means. It stops being a verdict about your worth and starts being a signal about their history. Here's what to watch for, because there is a line and it matters. Occasional withdrawal under stress is a nervous system pattern. It's uncomfortable, it's painful to be on the receiving end of, but it's workable. What isn't workable is when the withdrawal becomes the primary way conflict is managed, every time, without repair, without return. Clinical psychologist John Gottman, after studying more than 3,000 couples over 4 decades, identified what he called the 4 horsemen, the behavioral patterns that predict relationship breakdown with over 90% accuracy. The most corrosive of them isn't anger. It isn't contempt, though contempt is devastating. It's stonewalling. The complete flooding of the nervous system that shuts communication down entirely. When withdrawal stops being temporary and becomes structural, that's when the pattern has moved from a scar to a wall. If the person in your life comes back, if the silence breaks and the warmth returns, and they find their way back to you, that pattern is alive. Painful, but alive. The one that needs attention is the withdrawal that never ends. And there's a specific moment, a window that opens in the silence, when one response from you either widens the distance or begins to close it. The science on what that response looks like is stranger than you'd expect. That's what we're looking at next.